Hi, everybody. My name is David Rowe. I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and I work for a company called AuthX. And it's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks very much to Magnolia for having us. It's been a really great conference so far. My presentation is titled Content Management, Past, Present, and Future. And the presentation has a little bit of a theme. A few months ago, I had a meeting with a prospective customer who had a content management system from early 2000. They had been on it for about 14 years or so. And he asked me, he said, you know, what should we look for? What should we use? And they were kind of in a unique situation because they sort of missed the whole evolution of web content management overall. And I said, I really don't know. And the reality is, the reason I didn't know that is because they really, as I reflected on it, they hadn't gone through the process, the evolution as an organization of understanding why certain things are the way they are and really what the advantages of the future are, because those are lessons that we learn through, well, we learn it through a little bit of pain, to be honest. We learn from our mistakes, we see our opportunities, and we move forward. And without that history of this organization, it was really very difficult for me to say, hey, here's what you should work with or here's what you shouldn't have, given they didn't have that history. And that, on the reflection of that, I came up with this presentation. So first of all, let's talk about what content management is. And I think for the majority of this audience, we know what we're talking about, which is web content management. But of course, there's digital asset management, there's document management, there's even records management for that matter. And then if we split web content management down, I really differentiate web content management between two veins, right? There's intranet worlds, sort of managed corporate communication worlds, and marketing websites. And the latter is really what I'm going to focus on, but understanding the differences of those is very important as well. For internal or corporate communication websites, we like to think of those as contributor friendly, where we put a piece of content in and it just shows up magically everywhere. And for marketing oriented websites, we see marketers wanting total editorial control of their experience. They want to be able to optimize and manage their experiences across really the four dimensions of optimization in a digital channel: content, layout, imagery, and functionality. Having that ability to sort of tailor that experience and market really towards the relevancy of their customer. So I really love my job. And the reason is my background's technical. I started out as a programmer and have worked in really the web content management space my entire career. And what's really unique for me about web content management systems, and especially marketing systems, is that you can install a CRM system, you can put a database in, you can do a lot of things and make a lot of use from it, get a lot of value. But the reality is if you were to install Magnolia today, it would do absolutely nothing without somebody's idea or somebody's passion or somebody's message, something that's totally non-technical at all. It really requires that marriage of an idea as well with the technology for it to be effective. And when it is effective, it is really truly that total marriage, that total combination of we have an idea, we have a message, we have our differentiators. And so it's that combination of both the business message or the organizational message with the technology and then the empowerment of it. And I think it's a very, very unique space that we operate in, because if you look at other technologies, they really don't have that. They really just don't. And so I think we're very lucky to operate in that area. So if we go back a bit, if we look at what maybe the goals of content management have been, or web content management have been for some time, the first one is always one that comes up, especially early on. It was cost savings and time savings, right? And that continues to be a very important aspect of implementing these systems. But the second one is usually the driver of why people move to these new systems, and that's consistency in brand message. We see that over and over and over again, where customers or organizations have these wide landscapes of various web properties that all look a little bit different or a little bit altered, and we can't deliver that consistent message, that consistent customer arrangement. And then lastly, or not lastly, but moving on to it, there's the idea of content reuse, or being able to share content into multiple devices, multiple ideas. Some people use the term omni-channel, those sorts of things. But then lastly, the big one is really stopping that game of telephone overall. And where that driver comes from is these two guys. And I don't know if you're going to be able to see that. This is a fun graphic where we compare the difference between web designers and web developers. One has the freshly shorn beard, the other has the stubble beard, and they compare their various keyboards and different devices. And the reality is that business people really want to remove us from their marketing. You know, they want to own their marketing. They want to own their brand. They want to own their capabilities. They want to own the message, and they want to do it very easily and really without involvement from the technical folk as much as possible, right? The process of development, the process of creating your brand, the process of creating your design is a separate process from marketers trying a new message, trying a new campaign, those sorts of things. And so the idea, the underlying fundamental idea of web content management is to get the developers, to get the designers out of the contribution model and allow the marketers to do their job. So just real quick, so the way we look at, I hate animation. The way we look at the entire web content management space, imagine this square being that space, is we sort of cut it in half and look at, there's marketing sites and then there's e-commerce sites, right? And those are really becoming very different overall, right? I actually think of it as marketing versus selling, to be perfectly honest, because the lucky ducks who are in the e-commerce world have their entire customer journey in just one little silo where they can measure, hey, I did this and sales went up. Well, keep doing that, right? I mean, that's good, right? So marketers, we have it much harder. We have a much, much harder job. It's very hard to measure the effectiveness of new content, new images, new layouts, all those sorts of things overall. And it's unique. And so I think that's why we're seeing even the divergence between these two systems. And second of all, I kind of break them down in this kind of small, medium, enterprise, and hyper model. And where that comes from is if you're in the small market area, generally speaking, the people who are going to be buying the web content management system, selecting that tool, using it, are usually the people who are going to be doing it all in one shot, right? And it makes it a lot easier because it's not as much of a disruptive technology to the organization. Adopting a tool, adopting a new process, doing those things, you know, you can communicate it, you can see it, here's what we're going to do, this is what it's going to look like. The demo translates exactly into how their production release is going to go. In the hyperspace, technology is a little bit less important. You know, we've worked with a number of these organizations that have these, I call it, and this is my term, so if you Google it, it's not going to show up. That hypermarketers are organizations where their business is marketing, right? The tool doesn't matter. They would code straight HTML and put it live if they had to, right? It's all about agency enablement and process. And so web content management tools tend to take a little bit of a back burner compared to what the process is. And so that leaves the enterprise. And so we look at these enterprise customers, and they're in a very unique state right now, right? So they're, you know, and we all know what it looks like. They're battleships, right? And then they're not battleships in a bad way. They're battleships because they've been very successful. They have a lot of differentiators about their businesses and why they've been successful, and they are either in or moving towards a future digital marketing world where they absolutely have to have software that allows the business people to do their job. They don't have the army of marketers that the hyper groups do. They absolutely need the software to be effective, and they need it to fit in their business processes overall. So if we go back to the beginning of it, and so I'm 41 right now. I started working in web content management about 2003. And back then, when we were looking at it, there was a real rush to implement web content management. And as I remember with a bunch of different customers, they had hard-coded, hand-coded websites. And you know, they were talking to their CMOs and saying, hey, we can't update this, we can't make a change. And you know, as much as the CMO wanted to be in charge of digital marketing, they really weren't. They really had no control or very little control in the message that they were putting out. And so there was a real rush to put a technology offering in that could meet their needs of controlling their message. And so they asked a very critical question of their developers. Should we build it or buy it? And the answer is you should buy it. You should always buy it. There is absolutely no question. This is proven out 1,000 times over and over again, right? Buying is absolutely the only way to go. If your business is not having a web content management software business, you have no business building one at all, because you're going to be way outside of where the industry is going in a very, very short order, in a very short time. I say this very coincidentally because I still see this question coming up to this day. And you know where I see it coming in? Right here in San Francisco. All these tech shops, all these technical organizations who have a lot of developers, have a lot of coders, and have a product that is not web content management or not digital marketing, really are still looking at, can we just build it better ourselves? Because, you know, I mean, that's the Steve Jobs way of sort of looking at it, right? And so we do still see it come up. But for major organizations, they took that first question, and then they, you know, for the folks that did buy, they ended up with what I was kind of calling web content management in a box. And so you ended up with a number of tools. And frankly, if you did buy back then, it wasn't that much better than building it, to be perfectly honest. And there was a fundamental flaw with these early systems, and that is that they tied the presentation to the data. And so as soon as you did that, you were kind of, just a little bit better than building yourself, or even just that hard-coded stuff that you had in the past. And that's when we learned a really valuable lesson about web content management, and that was the idea of technical debt, right? Which is much, much, much more painful on the web content management space than it is anywhere else in the content management world. How many people here have a G drive with a bunch of documents on it that everybody can get to, right? Yeah, they're very popular. So document management doesn't have the same technical debt that web content management has. You can just throw everything on a drive and everybody can work it, and it's usable and it's useful. Web content management isn't the same way. You can't put something someplace and expect business users to use it or leverage it or work with it in a lowest common denominator situation. And so you had all these folks who had created a tremendous amount of content, tied it to the presentation, put it in a web content management system, and then suddenly they realized, hey, even though I did that, I can't actually still manage my content on my own. And so they paid for it. Now, the answer to this wasn't actually much better. This was the rise of something, and this is a bit of a mea culpa, because if you look me up, I have enterprise content management architect on my resume. The rise, so all right, so the story on this, right, is, and how many people know what I mean by enterprise management and concept? So the idea of this is that the CMOs, they said, this is awful. We built or bought these lousy systems on our own, we put them in, and now we're paying for it. And so what we should do is go to IT, and IT should select the tool that's perfect for the organization. We're going to standardize on it, and we're going to use that one tool for everything, and that way IT can support it, we'll use it globally, we'll have great knowledge sharing across the board. It'll be fantastic, right? It'll be amazing, right? And the concept then is that you could have one repository that could handle your documents, your web content, your websites, maybe images for digital assets, maybe records, and forms. All that data could go into one repository, and the whole company could use it. We're just going to standardize on that. We're going to make a big purchase, and that'll be it. That'll be great. And frankly, it didn't really work out so well. Marketers, strangely enough, they want to move very quickly. They want to be very fast. And if it works, keep doing that. And if it doesn't, stop, right? And throw it away. And for me, I was working on a tool called Stellent at the time. And I remember I was working on it was a marketing site, and we were trying to build a widget, and there was a little bit of an integration to a third-party system. And I came across this API that I was using, and it was for, do you guys remember Sarbanes-Oxley? It was this idea that you had to store all your records forever, and then they had to be auditable and those sorts of things. And I was using this API that was designed for their Sarbanes-Oxley code for document management in my marketing site, and it was very complex, and I just felt like I was doing it wrong. And then I even took a step back and I said, this whole thing is just wrong. Why marketers don't care about Sarbanes-Oxley? They care about getting their message out quickly and efficiently and smoothly, and it should be an easy process. It should be something that's very fluid and simple, not something that's complex, heavy, and requires the entire organization to get behind. And so in the last few years, what we've seen is really what I'm calling really the marketing rebellion on the web content management space. And it's the idea that, okay, we're done with the IT ownership of our marketing, right? We were going to own it ourselves. We're going to empower it. Maybe we'll host it somewhere else. Maybe we'll host it inline. And we're going to go a couple different directions. And so what we've seen the marketing team focus on is really a specific focus on web and presentation. And so, for me, just 10 years ago, I could tell you that if we were kicking off an engagement together, I would book a month to talk about metadata, data about the content, like a month to talk about that. How we're going to catalog this stuff, like, what the keywords are going to be, what your taxonomy is going to look like for like a 100-page website. And that is not making anybody any money at all. That is not growing the business. That is not helping the message. Like, sure, there's some technical reasons why you need metadata, certainly, but the upfront planning for a month of metadata, it was just ridiculous. And frankly, the JCR, the JCR model really cured that, because the reason you did a month of it is because you needed to plan in advance for what that model would look like going forward so that you could future-proof your solution for what their future marketing initiatives were, because it was so stinking hard to change the data model underneath an existing web content management implementation. And if you look at what Magnolia's repository and Jackrabbit and the JCR provide, they provide a very fluid and very easy way to change that model so it is future-proof intrinsically in your implementation. You know, there is, the second point is a lower focus on governance. You know, how many people use workflow, and I'm going to say workflow, but not, I understand that there's audit reasons where like we have to have 2 people, you know, approve something before it publishes. I'm going to put that aside. But how many people actually use workflow in their system? Anybody? No. Oh, you do? Write it back and forth? Well, you are Atlassian. I mean, that's kind of your thing. Yeah. So, all right, him aside. You know, okay, so yeah, most organizations really don't use it in a collaborative manner, and the reason is because they use email. And it doesn't sound that great, but it's a collaboration between marketers. It's an idea that anybody who's working in the marketing organization can collaborate, work together, and bring about a great idea. And so the rigidity that I think a lot of organizations were starting with around workflow and more around who can see what, who can touch what, has sort of dissipated a bit. And now we've worked in a more collaborative fashion, in a more easier fashion. Frankly, we use Confluence quite a bit, actually, for it. But you know, in a fashion where we can really work together, and there's less of a structure around governance, more a strategy around collaboration. You know, of course, there's flexible content typing. And then lastly, really, the big ones there, personalization and analytics. And personalization, and we're going to cover this in a minute or two, but it's not really being used right now. It is being bought right now. But I perceive that it's going to have a very, very big awakening soon. And if you look at how technology gets rolled out, it's very easy for companies to roll out new features and new technologies and new ideas. It's a much slower path for those organizations to adopt them and figure out the processes to effectively use them. But it's disseminating, and this is a major, major feature that I think is going to really hit the market strong. So as part of this rebellion, we had a couple choices. One, and this is very common, I saw this a lot, and honestly, it took me by surprise and had my head scratching when I saw these really big companies going and saying, I'm going to just do it on WordPress, right? And you're like, that doesn't, I'm not sure that that's what you want to do, but okay. And it made sense. You know, logistically, you had marketers who said, I got this agency, this 12 people, they know what they're doing. Look at how great that design looks. We don't need any features. We just need that web page online to handle our marketing stuff, right? And how do you argue with that, right? And the problem is that it's great, but you know, what qualifies as enterprise system? You know, how do you say WordPress isn't enterprise or Magnolia is? And so the definition that I throw out, again, this is me, is that an enterprise system allows you to do multiple things, and your cost is really just the differences between A and B project, right? So if I start A and I build a website, right, and then I go and do B website, right, my cost on it is really just the differences between those two projects, right? And if you have software that allows you to do that, to me that's an enterprise system. And I find that WordPress is fantastic for putting out a website very, very easily and very, very effectively. But as soon as you try to scale it to an enterprise system where you're like, hey, I now want to build on my assets, build on my content, have it understand a parent-child relationship between content A and content B from a translation perspective, I think it falls down quite a bit. But nevertheless, it's been a very effective model for organizations trying to get off of enterprise content management. And so then the other option is these guys, right? And so we're familiar with them, right? So they've got really, really, really great tools. They are feature-filled. They have everything in them. And you know, I could spend a little while talking about how their two different strategies flow. But they are about to, and we see it all the time right now, they are about to feature themselves out of the enterprise market. You know, we see them as, you know, frankly, the cost, license is certainly in there, but the cost to operate and operationalize an Adobe or Sitecore implementation at this point is becoming prohibitively high for even Fortune 500 companies that aren't specifically focused on marketing. You know, certainly if you have the dollars to invest in it, you can get value at it, but the scale of it is becoming very, very prohibitive. And why shouldn't it be? I mean, they're killing it. They have amazing features that, you know, we can template and we can copy and those sorts of things. But ultimately, in order to use them and to leverage them, both from a dollars perspective, and the dollars don't matter as much as the second one, which is time. From a time perspective on complexity, a time to deliver, a time to develop, and a time to throw away and say, hey, that didn't really matter, let's do something else. It's becoming very prohibitive to use these tools. And so what we see is this, which is really a model that organizations are taking a very strong look at today. They used to say, and it was funny, I used to hear this a lot when companies were starting to look at it, they would say, we're going to look at an open source solution. And I was like, open source? You know, and they're like, yeah, we're going to look at Magnolia. And you know, what we've come to term, it's not open source like they want it for free, it's open source that they want it light. They want it fast, they want it easy, they still want the enterprise capabilities, but they don't want the hassle of having to, you know, hire a guy for $400 an hour and have it take 6 months to launch a web page. They just don't. I mean, and why would you? If you're not going to get the value out of it, why spend the dollars on it, right? And there are other solutions. And when we look at what a Magnolia implementation looks like, you know, we like to think of it in the car analogy. You know, it's 80% of the capability, 20% of the time, 20% of the cost, right? And when you look at it in that fashion, you can say, hey, if I have Adobe, I can cruise Monza at 2 minutes a lap, but, you know, will it take me to work? Will I get home on time? Will I eat my lunch? Will I get all of the capabilities that I'm actually looking for? And when you adjust your focus from the features to what the capabilities are, that lens changes. And that's why we see these technologies, we see Magnolia as a disruptive technology to the web content management space, because it's changing the way we look at how marketing systems are managed, their leverage, and how they're implemented overall. Disruption isn't just about features, it's also about capabilities and how you go about doing things. And so that's really why we're very excited to be here today. So let's say we have a digital marketing platform. You know, how should you be looking at it today? You know, and for us, we see there is a bifurcated goal in digital marketing. There are two things that you are doing if you are marketing digitally, and they are separate and they are distinct and very often confusing for most, for most people, because you think, hey, I got a website. The first thing is brand expansion. This is what we've been doing for a while. This is marketing, right? We're expanding our brand. We're getting our message out. We're talking about our differentiators. We're laying out why we're better, why they're worse, you know, what we have, what are our events, is there a conference, all those things that we're talking about that build an understanding and expand our brand, expand our understanding of our organization or what we're trying to achieve. But then there's this other guy over here, right? And I am really trying to find a catchy term for it, but it's conversion rate optimization. And that's the idea of being able to take that traffic, take that brand, and transition web traffic, marketing operations, those things into leads, into people that we're going to talk to, into humans, right? You know, people that we can interact with. I mean, sure, there might be great reasons for, you know, just kind of putting out a, you know, we might put out a public service message or something along those lines. But the reality is probably 90% of the people who are marketing online want something, and want something from an individual or an organization that they want to interact with. And so how do you transition that conversation from a purely digital, I'm reading or looking or interacting with your website, to how do I understand who you are? How do I get you to tell me who you are? And how do we start a conversation? And then most importantly, and this is the next step on it after you get those leads, how do I decide who I want to talk to and who I don't want to talk to overall, and how to bring that about? And so, you know, for us, we start to look at, you know, a typical marketing platform. This is really what, you know, and I know we're talking web content management, but really when we look at it, this is kind of a high-level landscape of what we see as what digital marketers are ultimately looking for in terms of an overall platform strategy. And it starts with the web content management system, right? That is your core, that's your cornerstone, that's your landing space. But ultimately, there's a need to integrate for identity management. You know, people are registering on sites. People are interacting with you. People want to tell you sometimes who you are. You may not want to know all the time explicitly who somebody is, but there's an opportunity to get that. There's an aspect of video. How many people have video on their sites? Right, like everybody, right? You guys have ads too? I hate the ads. So, I mean, they're important, but I just hate it when they start the video and you're like, oh, come on, get to it. Anyway, so you know, video is a huge part of it. And video in a lot of ways is an outbound marketing technology, but is also conversely used from an inbound perspective. And it offers a tremendous amount of understanding in terms of who's looking at what, how effective your message is, and how interested it is. So you know, for a website, and granted, you could look at a page and say, hey, we've got people who are looking at this page for 2 minutes, so on and so forth. But from a measurement perspective, video gives you an incredible capability to say, people started playing it, they played it to the end, or they played it up to 2 minutes, they played it till David Rowe started talking. You know, any of those options are there for you in video as you measure that experience and what that message is overall. You know? And then what do we do when we get that identity? And that might be a registration identity, but also might just be somebody filling out a contact us form. It might be just somebody downloading something from your site where you have to give them an email. But ultimately, that goes into your marketing automation system. Do you guys, marketing automation, you guys, Marketo, Eloqua, hands, no? Okay. Fantastic tools, absolutely fantastic tools. And the best part about them is they sort of wander a little bit into the web content management space, but they really have no idea how to manage web content. But they do know how to manage and model leads and how to decide what a lead is. You know, and so, for instance, in the B2B space, right, one of the things that we find really interesting is the idea of modeling a lead, not just based on like an individual, like you downloaded something or you know, I signed up for something, but around the idea of a company, right? You know, we have a software company in around here as a customer of ours, and they look at what they call a marketing qualified lead as an organization, meaning a company, that has had 2 developers look at code on the blog site, or you know, in another example, 1 system administrator that looks up like stats or you know, how the system runs or what memory allocations are, and then 1 business person who downloads, say, pricing, for instance. And if they can find and decide that you know, that company has hit that criteria, and they do it all through the marketing automation piece, integrated into the web content management system, as well as their emails and SMSs and those other things, that immediately falls into, well, they use Salesforce, falls into Salesforce as an opportunity that the sales guys go and go after. And that is done totally, well, not totally, but mostly through automation, mostly through rules and an understanding of what the content you're putting out there is and what value that content has to different people, you know? And it makes perfect sense. As a developer, you're interested in code. Like, how am I going to use this? How am I going to write that? How am I going to deploy it? How am I going to maintain it? And as an administrator, you're wondering, how many calls am I going to get at 4 o'clock in the morning because the site's down? And then as a business person, of course, it's always the dollars, right? And so when you look at that, you see this is how a company engages us for business. And this is how a company that's engaging us for business interacts with us digitally. And you can understand those things with these models. So, and this is kind of an operational flow of how we look at it. It's a little fuzzy, but you know, the way we look at it is that there's multiple types of conversions. There's of course your conversions where you're going to buy, right? You know, that's a pretty good conversion. But there's also a conversion around the idea of identity, right? Where somebody on your website, on your web experience, tells you who they are, gives you a piece of their identity, whether they register, or they give you your email address. What they're saying is that your argument, your message is compelling enough that I would like to know more. I would like to know more about you. We're going to have a relationship on some level. I know that sounds a little odd, but that's a conversion. That aspect of a moment where somebody decides that they're going to let you know who they are. That's a big deal. And then there's the type of conversions that happen, and we don't really think of them very much in the web content management space, but they happen quite a bit on your emails and your social campaigns and these other messages that are just kind of floating out there that if we're the web managers, typically we're like, yeah, you know, that's the campaign guys are doing that. But it's all one environment to your customer, right? And that conversion, that moment when somebody says, hey, I'm going to arrive back on your website because you sent me an email, that's an important point that's happening. And so we like to track all that together and look for either an actual conversion or an identity conversion. And so as you know, we run campaigns and we begin to profile who these people are and why they're doing it. That obviously goes into a data collection process that's then aggregated, and out pops the marketing qualified lead. So typically this is pretty disruptive to a lot of companies right now. Unless you're a new company, unless you're someone who's starting with this model, who's adopting it from the very beginning, this typically has a big effect, especially those enterprise customers, those customers who are using technology because they need its aid. They don't have the army of people to go through all of these leads, all this data analysis, all of these things. They need automation. They need a technology that can help them scale their business, can help them scale their operations. As an example, this is a typical integration between marketing and the web content management system that we see in most of our clients today, right? Which is, them talking about it over coffee, of course, right? And this, and I think a lot of companies really are still seeing it that way. For us, I had a conversation with a customer a few days ago, and they said, what should we be doing about how we're organized and our site and these things? And I walked them through a process, and I said, think about what a good online experience is for you when you engage with a company, right? Typically you find them through an organic search, right? Organic search is incredibly credible, so good SEO, right? Having that ability to get your message out doesn't necessarily mean you're cheating or throwing crazy keywords out. It just means like good content that people are looking for you and they can find you. And if they find you organically, it says something. It says you understand them and their expectation for where you'll be is there. And so you find them organically. When they arrive on the site, it's credible. It looks good. It's consistent, right? Going back to our core content management goals. And everything's easy to find. You can find what you're looking for. It's relevant for you. You have that experience. If you choose to convert, the registration process is done professionally. It's not taking you to like another, and how many of you have been to like a site where you're like, oh, this is great, and then you click register or sign up or buy, and it's like clearly some other site that's like iframed in there or kind of jimmied, or I mean, that just always frightens me. Not because I think they're going to steal my identity, but just, what am I buying here, right? What are you guys doing? And so if you think of a good experience, it's a process that takes you all the way through. And when you do choose to share your identity, you feel that it's done so in a responsible, respectful manner. And then on a marketing automation side, it's integrated. As soon as you share that information, you get a response that says, hey, we've got your information, intrinsically or it's implied that they're taking care of it, and here's your next steps, here's what we're going to do, here's how it's going to work, and here's what you can expect going forward. And then maybe a week later you get a drip campaign that says, hey, what you bought or what you signed up for is ready, or maybe you'd be interested in this or something along those lines. And that's like a nice digital experience that you follow through. And so then I asked her, how many departments are in charge of each of those steps? And it was 5, right? And it was, do you guys talk? Nope. Not very much, right? There's an SEO group that's out doing an SEO study and providing keywords, and here's what our links are, and that goes up to the CMO. We've got our web content management people who are talking to product management, and they're saying, here's what our website needs to look like, here's what our message needs to be, here's what we need to be talking about. And then we've got marketers, the guys sending out the campaigns and the blasts that are sending out social campaigns. Maybe you have the same differentiators. Maybe they're talking to product marketing as well, but they're not talking together, and they're not looking at it as a consistent, unified experience. And the reality is that customers could care less about your org chart. They're really just seeing it as you're talking to them overall. And the art of moving these together is a disruptive fact for a lot of organizations. And being able to empathize with that, or being able to even just understand that, it goes a long way. So what do we look for? So personalization, going back to it, is huge, 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 huge. It is the glue that will allow marketing automation, marketing campaigns to tie into web content management. It's the first feature, it's the first capability that you can walk in the door and go, here's why marketers need to talk to content managers. Here's why you guys need to be in the same group, you need to be unified, and it needs to come together. We hear all the time, and even, I'll throw it out there, we even see the demos where we're talking about personalization based on what the weather is in your area, or how many times you hit a page, and those are great values. And we also warn people like, hey, it's not going to be creepy, or we're going to do a big analysis on what your personas are, and who's your customer, and how do we understand them, But let's go back to it for a minute. What we're really trying to do is win business and have a more relevant message to our customers. And when you talk about that, that's not big data. That's not science. That's not some algorithm. That's nothing. You know who your customers are because you know what your message is. And when you relate it to what your marketing initiatives are, you know exactly what to write. And I think the biggest reason that customers aren't really using personalization right now is because they don't know what content to create. The website already says what you need to say, right? Like, how much different can we sell Magnolia, for instance, to different customers? How many different ways can we describe it? That's not what personalization is, creating a different way to say something. What's personalization about is showing people what they want to see in a more relevant fashion. And an example I have is a customer of mine. This is really illuminating, and I've told this story to about 20 people here already, so bear with me. But we have a customer who owns 15 amusement parks in the United States. And we had a workshop with them, and they said, well, what should we do from a personalization perspective? And they had, they were geared up. They had done persona studies and a lot of different things to understand who their customers were, who the different types of people were, and they had about 8 of them. And it was like, people coming in from out of town, people who live there, all those sorts of things. And I was like, I think that's really just more of a list of the types of customers you have in the actual park. Let's talk about personalization for a second. And they were like, well, what do we write about? How do we know what to write? What's going to be effective? How do we create this content? And I said, well, let's go get the guy who sends your email campaigns out. And so they get this guy, and he's like in a back room somewhere, not in there. And he seems really happy that we're talking to him, because nobody really has talked to this guy. He sends out basically the offers, right? He does like, constant contact campaigns that say, okay, 20% off this week, and they just plow through an email list, and he's doing his thing, and looks and sends the report up, and nobody's talked to him. And so we bring in this room, and everybody's in there. And we said, hey, what gives you a lift, when you're sending out your blasts? And he's, no one's ever asked him that before. And he's like, well, the offers, they do okay, and we've tried a bunch of different scenarios where, we send this out to people who live here and this and that, but he's like, the only thing that really we get a lift on is if we send emails with pictures of kids stuff and things that kids like to do to people with kids, we get a lift. And if we send emails to people that we know don't have kids, and we don't have, like, it's fun and exciting, I know those are still kind of kid-like, but they're having fun, they're upside down. Most people don't want their children upside down. They look like they're having a good time, right? If you send emails of things to do, really exciting stuff that's happening at the park to people who don't have kids, we get a lift there too. And we're like, well, there's your personalization strategy, step 1, right? All we have to do is when we send out these campaigns, and if you start working with your email marketers, your campaign folks, you know what to write, you know what to put out there, and honestly, you know it's going to be effective. There is a beautiful moment that is happening every time somebody sends out an email blast or a social campaign where somebody is clicking on what you sent. They are giving you and telling you, and through their behavior, that they are interested in something that you're giving them to click on. If that email just takes them to your homepage and it has nothing relevant, or they have to go dig through what you're looking for, you're losing that voyage. You're losing that message. And so if we put all the big data and science and algorithms and persona studies away, and we just look from a common sense perspective, what's working? What's working in our marketing operations? It's very obvious for the kind of personalization campaigns and personalization strategies that we need to roll out. So ultimately, to close it out, our goals really, in a lot of ways, remain the same. We want to put the marketers in the driver's seat. We want a consistent message. We want a consistent look and feel. A little bit more, we want to scale it out for localization and content reuse and those sorts of things. But ultimately, it's about getting the IT folks out of marketing and the marketing folks in the driver's seat. And so I think I'm a little early. I can take some questions if you guys want.
Describe a little bit about what you mean in terms of personalization.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, like, what are the suite of tools that you see?
Sure. Well, for us, we've used a number of the JavaScript ones. So I mentioned Optimizely had come out a little bit. But what we're really excited about with Magnolia, for instance, is the component-based personalization that they're driving towards. They certainly have a really tremendous offering around page-based personalization, but soon we're going to have that component-based model. And what we see and what we're advising customers on is that there is a great combination that can happen with, I heard Optimizely, maybe from you, but I heard it over here earlier. There is a great combination that you can carry on with the JavaScript-based A/B testing and personalization frameworks, as well as component-based personalization frameworks. And so the way we're looking at it is, let's say you're rolling out a campaign for kids or emails or those sorts of things. That campaign has, in some ways, a multi-dimensional experience that you want to provide from an HTML and from a contributor perspective on the site. That can also be married then with an Optimizely or even a test and target, where we're looking to test market more things like terms or images and do that sort of testing. And so for me, like when we use, say, Optimizely, for instance, the point where I don't want to use it anymore is when it says upload HTML for a campaign, right? I think that's where we kind of cross the barrier of where it starts to be less effective to use Optimizely, because that's something that a contributor can't really do on their own. A contributor can go and click on the header and go, hey, would it be better to use this terminology or that terminology, and sort of test and understand it. But if you're actually rolling out, say, a campaign or a marketing message or a social campaign, something along those lines, typically there's a reason and a message that's associated with that campaign. And what we're saying is that from a server side or from a component-based model, that site should carry that message through on the customer journey. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Other questions? Oh, there we go.
So you said personalization, if you use personalization correctly, typically if they engage with the content, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you measure that? At what point in the balance rate, time on site, there's all-time work is where's the line? Is it an experiment?
Yeah, it's very tough. It's very, very tough. What we try to do is form really, we call them organic experiences. And this is where it goes back to e-com versus marketing. E-com, I mean, those guys have it so easy, And what's funny is most of the time when you see personalization studies on like the effectiveness of it, it really pertains to e-commerce, right? When they say like, oh, we got a 60% lift in sales or this or that, like that sales word is the key thing, right? Because they're in that test tube. But marketers really can get the same effects, only it's a little bit tougher to measure, but you can get the same effects because what we're talking about is doing behavioral-based personalization versus context-based personalization. And so, again, tough to measure, but what we look for are intrinsic goals. Like if we have certain calls to action or certain promotions on our site that are relative to a certain campaign, do we get a click-through on that? Is the click-through expected? Can we try to measure that ahead of time to see the effectiveness of that campaign overall? And then ultimately, if it's tied to marketing campaigns, there certainly is an intrinsic value that can be derived from the conversion of the initial marketing campaign and knowing that that journey was sort of carried on to the customer. But it is very tricky. Yeah.
From a human perspective, you mentioned that some of those departments were kind of siloed.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have like any recommendation about like how you actually got those departments to talk together again in order to have this journey for the customer?
Yeah, I think just about everything in a company can be, for the most part, you can motivate a company in a lot of ways to do many things, and the number one motivator that I like to bring to the table is value, And I think you probably have heard it, even just me talking here. I'm somebody who does not like buzzwords or terms or just like, hey, that sounds like a great idea. What you wanted to be able to do is show an idea that creates value. And when you talk to an organization about like, hey, where are your marketers, or where's your social campaign people, or how does that work, and you have that conversation and you present the idea of, your customers are talking to both these groups, but both those groups aren't talking to each other. And then you start to talk about, here are some strategies that you can employ they start to see that value in it. And I've had conversations that range from basically the subtle sort of idea of here you go, all the way up to, perhaps you should think about reorganizing, and really changing what your reporting structure is, because it might be that critical.
How about using Magnolia to facilitate that collaboration?
Mm-hmm.
So, as an example, I mean, obviously you had mentioned email,
Mm-hmm.
and you can use IM, and
Mm-hmm.
you can use your VP to collaborate and develop ideas. Is there any way to integrate that collaboration, or have you had experience integrating some of that collaboration within Magnolia itself?
In terms of the organization overall?
Right. So, for instance, let's say that you're developing a marketing campaign, so you have a company wiki where people start brainstorming ideas and putting together a timeline and putting together some text,
Mm-hmm.
and then finally it's coalesced enough to start engaging developers to
Mm-hmm.
put it together.
Sure.
Have you had any experience kind of integrating that process into Magnolia so that
Mm-hmm.
as in
Mm-hmm.
this company, this anonymous company wiki
Mm-hmm.
that you're using,
Mm-hmm.
somehow that you have some integration of that with Magnolia?
Yeah, and it's funny. It's not as it's not as fun of an answer because it's not as technical of an answer, to be perfectly honest with you. But what you're looking at is an upfront understanding of it. And so our general project methodology is one where there is an upfront socialization and discovery where we're talking about these things and you're sort of bringing them to the table. From an integration perspective, it's very easy. From a social campaign, there are links and there are values that are on those links that relate then to traits and then ultimately segments that you'll find on Magnolia overall. And so from a technical integration perspective, it's actually relatively simple. You can go a bit farther, and there are ways that you can pull from your marketing automation system segments and understanding of who of who your leads are, and then use that for personalization. And there's some value in it. I think there is, but it can get a little bit tricky when you get into first-click personalization, because as you go from server side to client side, which is how a lot of those tools sort of scale, you have to be very careful though. But from a campaign perspective and just understanding like what link somebody came in on and why they clicked it, that's just really associated with the URL that they're coming in on. And that gets captured, of course, by the trait. Great. Well, I'm David Rowe. I'll be around for the day. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.